Hello, everybody. This is Todd Dewey from the hit show Ice Road Truckers on the History Channel. And my source of radio and all truckers news, I go to tncradio.live.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the train station. I am Bill Waldrop, your host, along with my co-host Jim Leaders, and we welcome you back to the show. Our guest this week is Martha Simpson. She lives basically in the St. Louis area. Martha, what's the exact city you live in?
Chesterfield, Missouri, Bill.
Chesterfield, which is, I guess we could say, a suburb of St. Louis. Is that okay?
It's in West St. Louis County. West County is what we call it.
West County. Okay, that sounds good. A little chilly up there today, as I understand it. Welcome to the show. We appreciate you joining us today. Now, Jim and I have both known you for years. We know your background and what you do, and you've done many different things, and they're all fascinating. So we wanted to bring you on and kind of, learn more about you. But as we do with every guest, we'd like to start out with your young life. Where were you born and raised, and went to school and things like that?
I was born in Monmouth, Illinois, which is about 15 miles from Galesburg, Illinois, which, as you know, Bill, is a huge BNSF yard there in Galesburg. Right. So trains were constantly going through Monmouth. But to be honest with you, trains weren't even in my thoughts before I moved to St. Louis, to be perfectly truthful.
Right.
My first experience was a train I believe it had to be maybe 1962. They ran a special from Monmouth over to Burlington, Iowa, the day after Thanksgiving. We picked up Santa Claus and brought him back to the big city of Monmouth. We had, as I recall, all the children were on one car, just probably running up and down the aisles. And the adults, for some reason, decided to sit in another car.
I can't imagine why.
I can't either, but my grandfather, bless his heart, took my two younger brothers and myself. I would have been about 7 at the time, and the neighbor kid who went with us for everything. And if we thought we were hot stuff, let me tell you, because we got to go ride a big train to pick up Santa Claus.
And, of course, you've ridden many trains since, of course.
Many trains.
Which we will get into as we go along. So you grew up in the Monmouth area, and now you went to college also in Monmouth. Is that correct?
Yes. I went to Monmouth College. We are the home of the Fighting Scots. It had about 1,000 students in it.
Yeah.
And I was a business and economics major.
All right.
And this would have been the fall of 1973 when I started school. And at that time, there were 3 women who were business majors, and the rest were men.
Oh, my goodness.
And I should have known that was kind of a pretense, because it seems like every position I've had in life since, if I'm not the only woman, I'm pretty darn close, which is not, it wasn't on purpose. It's just, that's the way it was.
Gotcha. Now you said you didn't really get into trains much until later, and again, we will discuss that. But when you were younger, did you have any relatives or family members at all that were in railroading?
Well, you know what?
Fans, let's say?
I found out after my grandfather passed away in 1968, and my uncle told me later that he was born, I think, in 1904. No, 1908 is when he was born.
All right.
And in Virginia, very, very poor area. And he left home when he was 10 years old, believe it or not.
Wow.
And he wandered around, and he became a Gandy dancer. And they said that usually it was the African Americans that tended to be Gandy dancers.
Right.
But he was dark complected. And they just said, "Here, kid, you go do that." And then when they as he got older, he became one of the supervisors.
Now, so let me hold up there just a second. So some of our audience may not be familiar with that term, Gandy dancers. I know what it is. Jim knows what it is. Kind of explain to us what a Gandy dancer is.
Well, you could probably explain it better than me.
Jim, why don't you explain what that is?
Well, that's a man in the maintenance department that works on the tracks. He is pounding spikes and moving rail, shoveling ballast, and hard work.
Yeah, it is hard work. Absolutely. But
it's
kind of interesting how they got the name Gandy dancer, though. I had to research that.
Yeah, that's an old term, but
yeah.
Probably because they danced on the ties.
Well, maybe, yeah, because you had to kind of jump from tie to tie. So I guess it looked kind of like dancing. That's a good way.
All right, so Martha, he worked on the railroad, so there was a long ago family.
Very
member.
long. I didn't even know it. I wouldn't have known it if my uncle hadn't told me.
So after college in 1977, what happened in your life?
After I graduated from college, I looked and looked and looked for a job and finally found one at a local savings and loan. I was hired to be mainly a secretary teller. And my boss, God bless him, he said that he would kind of like to take a vacation every once in a while. So he said I was going to become a loan officer. So I did that. And by the time I was through there, I did everything. And in a small branch, you had to do everything.
Right.
So I remember when we go to the meetings for the whole association, there were 8 branches. Everybody would meet in the morning, and in the afternoon, the women would go off and do all the teller stuff and things the women needed to do. And my boss said, "You're not going anywhere." So I stayed in with all the men, and that made me a lot of friends. Let me tell you that.
Now, this is still in Monmouth, right?
Yes, this is still in Monmouth.
All right.
So I did that, and eventually I went to work for our main competitor across the street from my first savings and loan, and still worked in the secondary mortgage market, which is, say you took a loan out, Bill, and you made your payments to the Texas bank or something like that, and they immediately sell it off to somebody. I worked with the area. We would gather up all the loans and sell them off to somebody so we could get more money to make more loans.
Okay.
All right. Well, then what happened after?
What brought you to St. Louis eventually?
Well, I sent off an application to one of the major financial institutions down here, and they hired me to work in their secondary market. So I ended up working in the Treasury Department. Okay. And that was kind of interesting because we took loan applications. It was a major institution across the United States. And say you went in and put a loan application in Houston, the next day everything would show up on my desk in St. Louis. And it was my responsibility to make sure that all the information that the people in the branch took from your loan file, everything went into the computer correctly.
Right.
And then we'd put these reports together, and I'd hand them off to our treasury people, and they put together what's called a loan package to sell it off to somebody.
Now, let me ask you something. You went to St. Louis and did this. Now, from the time you went and picked up Santa Claus to the time you're in the St. Louis area, any other train rides through then, just local commuter runs or anything? Have you ridden any trains between that?
Not a single one. Oh, wait a minute. I did ride Amtrak one time when the Chicago Cubs were in the playoffs in 1983. A friend of mine got a ticket to one of the playoff games. And I took the train from Galesburg to Chicago, went to the game, and then came back that night. I forgot about that one.
Yes, so ladies and gentlemen, I will let you know right now that Martha is a major baseball fan.
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. And I am a major St. Louis Cardinal fan.
Oh, yes.
Now, Monmouth is about halfway between Chicago and St. Louis. Okay. So literally half your friends are Cub fans and the other half are Cardinal fans. My father was a Cub fan. I don't know what happened, but I am a huge St. Louis Cardinal fan.
Yes,
and I cannot tell you how upset my Cub fan friends were with me because I actually got to go to one of the first playoff games the Cubs had in probably 100 years. And they didn't think that was right. And the Cubs won, actually.
Cool. So you did the Treasury Department. You worked in banking for a while.
Yes.
And then from there you started doing city tours of St. Louis. Now, how did you kind of migrate from banking financial to doing city tours? And were you doing that at the same time you were still working in banking?
No, I had decided that 15 years of banking was enough. Right. So I took a little break. And there was an ad in the paper, and this lady said that she would like to find people who did tours of the city. Okay. So I had the interview and went in for her, and she hired me, and we had to do probably 6-8 weeks worth of training, where once a week we'd meet, and they literally would put us on a motor coach, and we'd go around the city of St. Louis and find out different things. And our test was, we had a certain area of the city and we were the guide for the day.
Right.
And it was fun. It was interesting. But before I had even graduated from this class, they called and said, we have a group in Chicago of students, and they'd like somebody to go to Chicago and lead them around the city. And I said, oh my goodness, I don't know. What are they going to do?
Did you know anything about Chicago? Did you know enough about it to show them around?
I knew nothing.
Oh,
nothing. Yeah, exactly. But they went to museums, and they went to well, actually, it was all museums that like the Shed Aquarium and the Field Museum and the Science and Industry Museum.
Love that museum.
Like that. The thing that sold me, though, was she said they went to a White Sox game on a Saturday night. And I said, okay, I'll go. So I went up there and I muddled my way through, and we had a great time. And when I got back to St. Louis, one of my teachers that was leading the class to turn me into a tour guide, he said, do you realize you were the fifth person she called? Everyone else turned the job down. And I said, okay. And he said, what would you have done if somebody had gotten sick? I said, I guess you call 911. And he started laughing and he said, yeah, you're going to be okay, kid. You know enough to do that. So, because that's all you have to do is just common sense, really.
Yeah. And just corral the kids and make sure everybody's together and got back on the bus, things like that. Now, so you did Chicago, but you did some trips to Washington, D.C.
Yes, yes.
And, of course, around St. Louis and things like that. Was it all only students, or could it be any group that needed a tour?
Well, the Washington, D.C. and the Chicago and the St. Louis were primarily students.
All right.
Now, the one thing you learn is if you're in tourism and you live in either Kansas City or St. Louis, eventually you will go to Branson.
Of course.
And after a few years, it ended up I did primarily Branson. And it was interesting, to say the least.
And I'm sure
Did you ever ride the Branson train down there?
Yes, the Branson Scenic Railroad. I cannot emphasize enough. If you ever go to Branson, you have to do the Branson Scenic Railroad, and in the fall especially.
Is it still running?
Yes, as far as I know.
Oh yeah, it's still running.
Yeah.
Well, I think I haven't ridden that. No, we took the AOE up to Branson, but I don't think that's the same thing. But I'll tell you what, let's take a quick break real quick, and we'll come back and we'll pick up on that and talk more about tours and going down to Branson and the interesting stories and people you met in Branson. This is the train station on TNCRadio.live. Our guest today is Martha Simpson. I'm Bill Waldrop along with Jim Leaders. We'll be right back.
It's Landline Now, followed by Steve Summers' Overnight Drive every night on TNCRadio.live starting at 11 p.m. Eastern and 10 p.m. Central.
Be sure to listen to Building Strong Minds with Dr. Chris, Mondays at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, right here on TNCRadio.live.
Welcome back to the train station on TNCRadio.live. I'm Bill Waldrop along with Jim Leaders, your host on the program. And our guest today is Martha Simpson. She's up in the St. Louis area talking about her very interesting life of doing tour guides and more to come. She's got some interesting stories coming up. Martha, when we stopped at the end of the last section, we're talking about doing tours with mostly students, and then you started going down towards the Branson, Missouri area, which we've all been to, and it's a great place. Tell us a little bit briefly about Branson experiences down there.
Well, you talked about riding a train to Branson. As a matter of fact, my very first year I was touring in Branson, leading tours, went into the city one day, and I saw this huge train that was parked next to what was the charcoal factory. And I kept saying to my people, I wonder what that was. I wonder what that was. Well, actually, didn't know it at the time, but that's the one you and Jim were on. And several of our other friends at the time were on that. And every day I say, wow, wouldn't that be cool? Well, that ended up being the American Orient Express, where I went to work on that shortly after that tour.
What year was that, Martha, that you went to work for them?
I went to work for the AOE, as we called it, in 1997.
Yeah, we were down there in 96, about a year before that.
Yeah. When I was doing the tours in St. Louis, Bill, Union Station, which is our big train station here in St. Louis,
yes,
it had its 100th anniversary in 1994.
Okay.
They decided that they'd kind of like to do some tours of the station.
All right.
So the company that I worked for got involved, and several of my friends. What we did was we took turns, and every Saturday and Sunday we would go down to the station, and I think it was either every hour or every other hour we would give a tour of the station from, say, 9 a.m. until 5 p.m., something like that.
Right.
And so that's what we did. So that's how I actually discovered a lot about trains into St. Louis. I knew nothing about trains in St. Louis before then. But one of the tours we did, this train called the American Orient Express actually came into the station one evening as part of a tour, which was a big deal because regular passenger trains don't go into the station anymore.
Right.
So we always thought that was neat. And 5 or 6 of us went down, and we had small groups that we took around the station. And when we were through with that, some of the people that worked on the train said, "Come on, we'll give you a little tour of the train." And I thought, oh my gosh, this would be so neat to work on something like this, because you'd be on a train for one thing, go all the way around the country. You wouldn't be on a motor coach climbing on and off. And I thought, being a tour guide on a train wouldn't be such a bad idea. So I asked one of the tour people that worked there, how do you find out about this? So she gave me who to write to. It was a company in Seattle, Washington. I sent off my letter right away and heard nothing until 1996. I got home from my last Branson trip of the year, and was set for a whole winter off with nothing to do until I went back to Branson the next year. And there was a message that said, "This is so-and-so with this company. Would you be interested in working on the American Orient Express?" And believe me,
it took him 2 years to get a hold of you, right?
It sure did. Sure did.
Wow.
Yeah. I found out later that every time you stopped, whoever you had as a tour guide for a local place would say, "Wow, how do you get to work for this place?" So I'm actually shocked that the lady actually gave me the right information in that. But the turnover is quite substantial on the train. At least it would be, because you were gone from home. It's hard work doing that.
Sure it is.
But go ahead, Bill.
Tell us a little bit about the AOE for people not familiar with it. How did it start? What's it based on? And where all did it travel, or where did you travel with it across the country?
It was a tourist train. We had, as I recall, 14 cars. I do know that it was about a quarter of a mile long. And I know that because I used to have to walk from front to back over and over and over again.
I've done that before.
That year. Yeah, you did. It was based in Seattle, Washington. A company handled the tour people, and then all the porters and the kitchen staff and everything else. They hired those from a company actually here in St. Louis called Clipper Cruise Lines. Okay. So rather than having their people work on a cruise ship, they just put them on board this train. So it worked out okay. Yeah. But I did one trip where we went from Washington, D.C., and we took what I didn't know at the time was the Crescent route. We went from Washington to New Orleans. We got off, did a tour of New Orleans. Then we went over to San Antonio, got off, did a tour of San Antonio. First time I ever saw the Alamo. I feel like I made it when I've seen the Alamo now.
Right.
And then we kept going. We went to Santa Fe, and we did the Grand Canyon, and then we ended up in Los Angeles. But primarily after that, they concentrated mostly on national parks in the West.
Okay.
Like
Yellowstone.
Glacier.
Yellowstone and the Tetons and the Grand Canyon and Glacier Park.
Your favorite, Glacier Park.
Glacier Park is one of those places, just like the Grand Canyon. You have to be going there. It's just not something you're driving down the interstate and see an exit for the Grand Canyon. It doesn't work that way.
Right. And I've been to a bunch of national parks, but I have yet to go to Glacier. I'd love to go there sometime.
Oh, it's magnificent. If you ride the Empire Builder, you actually go through Glacier Park.
Okay.
And I would recommend, if you have a choice, take the Empire Builder that goes east, because you go through the park during the daylight.
Okay.
If you take the route from Chicago to Seattle west, you go through the park, but it tends to be at night and you can't see much.
depending on the time of year. During daylight
Yeah.
saving time, you can
Yeah.
see it, but
Right.
yeah, the westbound is better. Then you get off at night, and you're right there for the next morning activities at Glacier.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah. Now, when we did Glacier, we actually were able to park there at West Glacier.
Okay.
Right.
And then the local tour company would come in and they take us through the park and the going to the Sun Road. Oh my goodness, it's just magnificent.
Now, did they use regular motor coaches, or did they have the red?
No,
red-
we used the red jammers. They
The
put us in the
jam.
red jammers. Yeah.
Right.
You made note also that when you went to Yellowstone and the Tetons, they had no train access. You had to park
No.
somewhere else, and they took a bus in, right?
Yeah, we parked as close as we could. Same with when we did Bryce and Zion Canyons. You park as close as you could, and then you take a motor coach in.
Yeah,
Okay.
Bryce, you go to Cedar City, Nevada,
Yeah.
and for the Tetons, Yellowstone, you'd go to somewhere north of Pocatello, where there was.
Yeah, it was someplace in Idaho. I can't remember exactly.
I thought it was
and-
Idaho Falls, but it's north of Pocatello, and then on the motor coach, and that's
On
when
the
that's when you went to work, right?
Oh yeah, that's when we went to work, and it didn't take long. I didn't have a lot of the American Orient Express was definitely luxury travel,
Right.
and I when you do Branson and motor coaches, that's not exactly luxury travel. So my coworkers tended to make fun of me, but it didn't take them long to figure out that once we stepped off the trains and got onto the motor coaches, I was the one that ruled the roost. I knew what to do. I knew how to handle the drivers. I knew that you're going to have to stop for a break. You're going to have to do this and do that. So they kind of let me take over when we did the road trips.
Cool.
And
Now, the AOE, of course, is based on the original Orient Express, which
Yes,
runs through
yes.
Europe, and they've just recently revived it and extended the routes and all that stuff, and it's very expensive, but it's a nice way to travel through Europe. That's on the old bucket list, if I could ever get over there and ride
Oh,
that
no
thing.
kidding. No
That-
kidding.
That would be nice.
That
Well,
should
it would
on-
be great if they brought the American Orient Express back, but that's all history now. They sold off all the cars to private owners, and that train will never be back. Unfortunately, no more Grand Canyon and no more Glacier.
No, unfortunately.
And
Those-
we had a
those
great
days are
time
gone.
on the train. It was an amazing way to travel on that private train. And speaking of private trains, Martha, you also worked on a private rail car for
Yes.
4 trips in 2013. Who owned the car, and
Yes.
where all did you go with that?
Our friend Patrick Henry owns the cars, the Evelyn Henry and the Warren Henry. They're named after his parents. One is a sleeper car, and the other one is a dome diner car. I did 4 trips that year. The first one was Mike Haverty, who happens to be retired now. He was the head of the KCS Railroad at the time.
Okay.
And the Santa Fe.
And the Santa Fe, well, he had worked for the Santa Fe, but then he left them and went to work for the KCS.
And that's
Yeah,
when
but he
you
worked
met him.
Majority of his life for the Santa Fe.
Santa Fe, correct.
Many
Yeah,
many
correct.
years, and rose from a train master to president. So
Oh, he actually he took his family out. It was a tour to celebrate his birthday. I believe he was 69 that year, and he'd spent 50 years with the railroad. So it was kind of a combination. He would get up early, and I was the early riser. So I brought him a cup of coffee, and he said, sit down and just talk with me. He told me all about his life in the railroad, actually before it started out, up to current time. And some talk about fascinating stories, and how he started out going, and his father, gosh darn it, passed away shortly after he had left for college. And one of his father's good friends kind of took him under his wing and just said, okay, this is what you need to do here, there, and all that kind of stuff. But he went to work for the Burlington Northern, or no, Santa Fe, I'm sorry.
Santa Fe, yes.
Santa Fe, yeah. And various things turned out. And then he told me about when he moved to Chicago and when he did this and when he did that. And I have to tell you, the whole time I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, I know about 5 guys that would kill to be sitting where I am right now.
And you're
But
speaking
what
to
was-
2 of them right now.
Two
yes.
of them I'm speaking to right now. Let me tell you, I know that for a fact.
But listen, Martha, what was your job with the Haverty family on this charter trip?
They brought their grandkids, and they had me come aboard. they said I wasn't really the babysitter. And I said, let me ask, am I just here to make sure the kids don't fall off the train? And they said, yes. So,
babysitting.
So, yeah, I guess that's what it was.
And how old were they at the time?
Well, there was one, the oldest was, she was just getting ready to go into high school. Mm-hmm. And so she would have been probably 13, 14.
Right.
And then there was another one that was about 10. And then I think the youngest on that side was maybe 6 or 7.
Did they know anything about trains?
Not really.
Yeah.
But there was another group that came on, and there was a baby, and then the next one was maybe a year and a half, 2 years old, somewhere in that area.
Another relative?
Yeah, another set of grandkids. They joined us later on in the trip. They weren't there from the beginning.
Now, after Mike Haverty, you did a trip with Senator Claire McCaskill.
Yes,
and,
yes.
So we only got a couple of minutes here. Tell us about the McCaskill trip, what it was about, and who all she had with her.
Well, she was celebrating her 65th birthday, and her husband said, how do you want to do it? She said, I want a train trip.
Senator McCaskill was
from Missouri.
From
Missouri.
Yes. Yeah, and they lived there in St. Louis?
Yes, she actually, I think she lived in Kirkwood, Missouri, which is another suburb. Yeah. So what she did was she invited her staff, and she's a Democrat. She had anybody that was associated with her. On Friday night, we went up and we served a full formal dinner to, I believe it was about 65 people or so.
Wow.
On the rail car?
Yes. What we did was Amtrak gave us an extra diner to go along with. So we had that. We had 65 that we formally did a dinner for going up. And even Chuck Schumer joined us going up. We picked him up, I think it was in Bloomington. And Senator Schumer was with us. And then coming back, there were maybe 45 or so that were joined us for the day coming back from Chicago. That was on a Sunday.
So you used the Amtrak diner and Patrick's facility, because I think he seats 12 at his dinner table, if not 10.
You definitely needed that.
Yeah, we did. We did.
But who did all the cooking?
We actually, his cook Felix was our main cook, and then he hired another couple of guys to come in and help. And I'll tell you, it was work. Believe me, it was work.
And I bet the food was good also.
Oh, the food's delicious. It was delicious.
Hey, we got to take a break real quick. Thank you so much. And we'll be right back. This is The Train Station on tncradio.live. If you like these stories, maybe you have an interesting story. Would you like to be on the program? Or can you maybe recommend somebody that would with an interesting story of railroading? Please contact us. Our email address is houstonrailfans@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you, so drop us a line. We'll be back with the next segment here with Martha Stewart.
I think all that, yes.
We'll be right back with the next segment with Martha Simpson in just a moment. Keep it right here on tncradio.live.
Hey, rideshare drivers and gig economy workers, the host of tncradio.live, the Rideshare Rodeo Podcast, and the Gig Economy Podcast come together for news, talk, music, stories, laughs, and more. We're live Fridays at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, right here on tncradio.live.
At Hotshot Secret, we share the science behind common diesel problems. For example,
diesel fuel cetane levels.
The cetane rating in diesel fuel is 42 to 45. Most diesel engines operate more efficiently with a cetane rating of 48 to 50. One treatment of Hotshot Secret Diesel Extreme will raise your cetane 7 points, increase fuel economy, and improve cold starts.
Hotshot Secret Diesel Extreme is available nationwide at truck stops, fine farm and auto stores, and online at hotshotsecret.com. Hotshot Secret, powered by science.
Front Lane introduces Impulse, the world's first collision alert system for the driver behind you when you have to brake hard. Impulse uses ultra-bright pulsing red LEDs to alert drivers behind you who might not be giving their full attention to the road. Using amazing accelerometer technology and a battery that will last for years, Impulse installs in minutes, fits nearly any vehicle, and never requires additional wiring. Drivers react 50% faster, helping to protect you and your passengers. Learn more by visiting www.frontlane.com/impulse. That's www.frontlane.com/impulse. Approved by all 50 states. Impulse by Frontlane.
TNCRadio.live, your commercial driver navigation station.
Welcome back to the train station on TNCRadio.live. I'm Bill Waldrop along with Jim Leaders. Our guest today is Martha Simpson out of St. Louis, and we're talking about her experiences in the railroading industry. Jim, you wanted to go back real quick and talk about the Mike Haverty trip that she handled. Go ahead.
Yes, and I wanted to ask you, Martha, about, since you were in charge of the young adults, what was your duty there, and how did the meal service go, and what fun did you have with the kids?
Well, the kids would eat earlier than the adults, of course, and we would eat upstairs in the dome car part because there were tables and things for them to do that. So as soon as we got the kids finished with their meals, then usually the adults would start in a little bit later. So I would take all the kids back to one of the lounge cars at the very end of the train, and we had a video where we could put on Cinderella or whatever to keep the kids entertained, so they wouldn't get into any trouble.
Now, but this was in one of the KCS business cars that Mr. Haverty.
Yeah, you had two additional KCS cars on the train, right?
They brought two. Yeah, they brought a staff car because there was so many family members that they needed every one of the sleepers that Patrick had. So they had a staff car for the four of us that were on. Actually, there were six of us with part of the staff. Right. And then there was a beautiful lounge car that was the KCS business car. It had a huge back platform. And back then, Amtrak actually would let people sit out on their back platforms. They don't allow that anymore, but we could. So I took advantage of being out there with the kids, and I would probably do like a lot of parents do. I turned the video on, the kids were entertained, and I skipped out to the back platform and enjoyed myself for about an hour and a half every night, watching everything that's going on, and there's no better place to ride on a train than the back platform.
Well, that's for sure.
That was my entertainment. And then if the kids needed me, I'd come inside and take care of them. And then eventually the adults would start to wander through.
The adults had formal dining every night, right?
Yes, every night. Yeah, breakfast and lunch were a little bit more casual, but for the evenings, it was definitely formal dining.
Yeah, well, great. All right. Well, now, Bill, let's go into our next topic with Martha.
Now, the next topic, and this is how you're involved with railroading today. Starting in 2007, you started doing expediting jobs. Now, again, and this is also what Jim does. If, Martha, kind of explain what an expediting job is related to railroading.
Well, an expediting job in a perfect world, to be honest, wouldn't be necessary, but it is because things don't always run smoothly on the railroads, right, Jim?
That's correct. And our customers need special attention because of the type of cargo that we handle.
Exactly.
It needs constant attention from point A to point B, depending on the route and what railroad you're on.
Right. So, Martha, tell us what kind of items do they carry, and why it needs the expediting job, and how did you handle it?
Well, I work primarily with transformers. Sometimes you get a boiler every once in a while, and with the transformers, there's certain height and width, and each time it interchanges from one railroad to another, it has to be inspected. Living in St. Louis here, it will come in, say it comes into St. Louis on the Union Pacific, then it goes to the Norfolk Southern. Well, the Norfolk Southern has to examine it to make sure that it follows all the specifications. And once that's done, then it goes out. But I will follow these loads every once in a while, say to Chicago or to Indianapolis or whatever, and get it done. High wides, as we call them, need extra handling. And a lot of times the railroads don't want to do it right away. So we go in and prod them along a little bit and say, hey, I've got my transformer here. When do you think it's going to get out? And they'll say, well, it's going to be tomorrow. And then you make sure that it's tomorrow.
Now, did you ever, now I know for a couple of times, Jim actually rode on the train. Did you actually ride on the train, or were you always in a vehicle pacing it or following along in his progress?
Well, to be honest with you, when I started out, my boss didn't quite know what to do with me because I'm a woman. Right. And he told me that he used to toss and turn at night, and his wife would poke him and say, she's fine, honey, quit worrying about her. But he never, yeah, they never let me go out and ride. Jim got to ride every once in a while, but no, right. I always followed along. I either rented a car or took my own. Right. And did that. So, which I don't mind. It's easier.
Yeah.
And now, luckily, I get to rent cars because we can't ride it. We can't ride them anymore. We normally stick to I stick to the Western railroads, and Martha does handle the eastern part of the country there from St. Louis on east. But
now you mostly, like Jim said, mostly St. Louis. And how far would you travel with these high wides outside of St. Louis? Any long distances, or mostly like up towards Chicago, over to Kansas City, something like that?
Well, very early on, I went out to West Virginia, and I decided, that's too long for me. So I tell the boss I go within 1 day's drive of St. Louis, which is primarily Kansas City, Chicago. I go back to Galesburg, of course, Indianapolis. Every once in a while, I go to Cincinnati, but not very often. So I just tell him, if I can't get there and back in 1 day, I'm not going. So he's kind enough to me he works with my quirks. Let's put it that way. So I just find it easier to only have to go that far. So that's what I do.
So you don't ride the train. So say that, it's going to, so how long would it take normally? Let's say it's a big transformer and it's going to Chicago. How long would it take on a normal train, and how long does it take on a high wide, and with your skills, getting that thing moved along?
Getting through Chicago is a major problem. I had a transformer one time that had to be at a certain spot in a small town in Indiana in 3 weeks. And the boss called and said, and it started out in Waukesha, Wisconsin. He said, can you do it? And I said, well, sure, we should be able to. Well, he calls me back the next day and he said, you've actually only got 2 weeks because the state of Indiana was closing a bridge that the transformer had to go on to get to the final factory. And if we didn't get it across this bridge, you might as well turn around and send it back to the factory because the road was going to be closed for a year. So I pulled in all the favors I could. It started out in Waukesha, Wisconsin on day one, and we got it through Chicago in less than 24 hours, which I'm currently right now working on a car that has been in Chicago for a week. I can't get it out of there.
Oh, no.
So, yeah. So I went in early in the morning, and it was on the CN Railroad at the Markham Yard, and got a really nice, friendly lady yard master, told her what my problems were. So she helped me all day. And when she turned it over to her next shift guy, he thought I worked for the CN, and he got it out of there. So I never did tell him I don't really work for the CN.
Yeah, they don't ask, don't tell,
Sometimes these people think we're actually working with the high wide department, because we talk to yard masters and train masters mainly in the yards to expedite our move, because they have dwell times on some rail cars sit there for 3-4 days, and we don't have 3 or 4 days.
Now, on the high wide, you're mostly concerned, or the railroad's mostly concerned with the width, because they can hang out over the edge of the train a little bit.
Yeah.
And also, I guess, the weight going over certain bridges and things like that, which could cause special routing, if I understand.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Everything's got to be cleared. You've got to do it. You've got to do it.
We don't handle any of that. We have a set route, and they have to stick to it. No detouring. One story, Martha, real quickly. Tell them about the snow days in Chicago.
My gosh.
What year was that?
Oh, it had to be at least 10 years ago. One winter in Chicago, they had hardly no snow at all until February. And I had a 1-car special, which means it just had the locomotive and the transformer. It was going out to Arizona, needed to be out there quickly. So the customer bought what they call a special train all the way to Arizona from Chicago, which is very expensive.
Yeah.
Well, hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah. It started snowing just at the same time I arrived in Chicago with the transformer. I was there for 19 days before I got it. If I would go in and you'd have one snowstorm after another. And one day they had taken the engine away, so we couldn't go. Then the next day they found an engine, brought it in, but they took the crew away. And every day it was one excuse after another. And my boss was ready to kill me. And you get frustrated, but actually it starts to get kind of funny, if you know what I mean, in kind of a perverse sort of way, I suppose. It just kept snowing. And so that, it would melt. There was a big, so to speak, meltdown in the yards because nothing could get in and out.
Oh, okay.
And finally, at like the 18th day, they said, okay, you're going tomorrow. You're going to go. So I get out there and I walked in and the yard master said, you're not going to believe this, but they got like 10 inches more snow overnight.
Oh.
And they weren't expecting it. And they took away all the snow removal equipment. And he said, his boss said, there's no way we're sending out that multi-million-dollar transformer in this weather, because if we have any problems, I'm not doing that. So he said, call your boss and tell him we're not leaving because it snowed. So I did. And the boss said, you're right. I've never heard that before. But we finally got it out of there. 19 days. That's my very favorite job.
And how far did you travel with that transformer?
All I had to do was get it out of Chicago.
Oh, okay. So you didn't have to follow it to Arizona.
No, I wanted to leave because I wanted to come home. So So once it left, I just came back to St. Louis. I didn't have to go to Arizona or anything.
Wow.
But that was good. Yeah.
Now, Jim, real quick, jumping over to you. I know you've done expedites. You do more long distance runs. Is that
right.
correct? What, just for example, what's the longest one you've done?
Well, one time, many years ago, I flew to Baltimore and had to ride the CSX from Baltimore to Chicago via Cumberland, Maryland. And that took a couple of days, and then finally got in the hotel in Chicago for a day and a half, maybe 2 days, and then got out on the Union Pacific and went all the way from Chicago to North Platte, and on North Platte on to Salt Lake, Ogden, and then down through Las Vegas because we were going to California. So I did a transcontinental trip.
Wow.
And it was really torture on that train. I always rode the second locomotive, so I'd have, not bothering the crew. I'd go up and talk to them, but I had a radio so I could hear what was going on. But by the time I got to Las Vegas, I just bailed out and
I wouldn't be surprised if you said, I'm not doing this anymore.
No, I went because I did have about 48 hours in Chicago, but I had no time at North Platte because we just kept moving. And, the crews get off every 12 hours, but I stay on the train. So by the time we got to Vegas a couple of days later, in the evening, I just bailed out and went to a hotel, and the first shower in a couple of days and the first real good food, and slept and went out the airport, rented an automobile and drove to Los Angeles and beat the train there.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's when you learned, I'm going to use a car from now on.
Yeah. And then, we're using automobiles. So, but that was the longest. But nowadays I'm out for sometimes 10, 12, 13 days, just depending.
Oh my goodness.
And, go all the way to Houston. A lot of these come in from the port of Houston,
right?
And some come from Mexico via Laredo to Houston. But I'm out and in the rent-a-car, and luckily get to go to the hotel every night now. And you can always catch up with the train the next morning.
Oh,
it's
not a problem. It's good to live on an expense account. I like
that. That's what we do.
We got to take a break real quick. We'll come back with the final segment in just a moment. This is the Train Station on tncradio.live. I am Bill Waldrop along with Jim Leaders. Our email address is HoustonRailFans@gmail.com. Please drop us a note. We'd love to hear from you. And we'll be back with our guest, Martha Simpson, in just a moment. Stay tuned. Join Shelley Johnson and Kathy Tuccaro every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Central Time for Women Road Warriors on your driver navigation station, tncradio.live.
We got love that we'll never need to hide. Love will always rise above whatever comes.
Don't miss Marcia Campbell, North America's trucking sweetheart, Thursdays at 6 p.m. on tncradio.live.
Welcome back to the train station. This is tncradio.live. I am Bill Waldrop along with my co-host Jim Leaders, and our guest on this week's show is Martha Simpson out of St. Louis, and we're in the final segment talking about what she does now, and she does the same thing that Jim does, and that is high wide load expediting to different areas of the country. Martha, we're talking about mostly you travel between St. Louis and Chicago, maybe Cincinnati, over to Kansas City, but you said you had an interesting one that went a little further than you were expecting. Tell us about that.
Well, the boss called and he had a train that was, or a car that was going over to South Dakota. And he said, would you like to go? Well, it's October. I said, okay, I'll do it. He was in a bind. So I drove over there and got it done. And I can't remember exactly, but it was about an hour and a half or so west of Sioux Falls. So it was out there.
Yeah.
So I get back and I'm driving home and he calls back and he said, well, we got another one that's going in that area near Brookings. And I stopped off and looked at the map and I said, well, all right, I'll do it. Because I knew he was in a bind. Right. So the first one was in October. This second one was in November. And I called him and I said, it's getting kind of cold out here and a little bit of snow. I'm done with South Dakota.
Right.
Or so I thought. He called me back. He's got another one that's going in basically the same area near Brookings. And he said, would you do it? And I said, okay. So I did that one. Then he had another one that went out there. So I had 4 transformers from one each in October, November, December, and January. And I called him up after the January one was delivered. And I said, I'm done. I am not going back to South Dakota in the wintertime.
Were those coming out of Chicago or out of St. Louis?
No, it started out in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. And then it went from Fond du Lac to Minneapolis and Minneapolis down to Mankato and then Mankato over. So I was from one snow capital to the next.
So did you pick it up in Fond du Lac or did you wait?
Yeah.
You did the whole route.
Yeah, I did the whole thing.
Wow.
And I was just one happy camper those 3 months. It was just like, I can't believe it's snowing again. So I called him. And so now when he wants to tease me, he'll call me up and say, I got one in South Dakota. And I said, call Jim. I'm not going.
He loves sending us up to these frigid places like South Dakota, Montana, right, and Minnesota in the wintertime.
Now there are other people that work for Tom, your boss.
Yes.
So in some cases, I guess you go a certain distance and then you hand it off to another person. So there are handoffs if it's going across country nowadays.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well.
Yeah. This last job I just finished. In fact, Jim started it. Jim, tell him you had where you had it from and where you dropped it off. You picked it up in Houston and took it to Oklahoma.
Oh yeah, that's right. 2 cars and took them to Oklahoma City, and then somebody else picked them up. And then Martha picked him up at Galesburg and took him to the final location at Lorenzo, Illinois.
Gotcha. Now, Martha now here's kind of a funny story here. And this is very interesting. Martha has a special way of, we'll just say, thanking the crews and appreciating their expediting. Tell us what it is that you kind of, initially started and now it's almost demanded of you. Tell us about this.
Well, it started out when I started doing this, it was mostly local and the guys didn't quite know what to do with me because I'm a woman. And right. So once they figured out that, okay, I'm all right. The first Christmas, I worked a lot with 2 yards here in St. Louis, especially the A&S yard and the Terminal Railroad.
Right.
So I made them some fudge and took it in because I like to make fudge.
Yeah.
So I took it into these 2 offices. And then the next year I thought, I work with more than one shift. Maybe I better take them a little bit more.
Right.
And then I thought, I work with more than one department. so maybe I should take them a little bit more for that.
Right.
And it ends up, we have 6 major railroads here in St. Louis. And I take it to all 6 railroads. And some of the railroads I cover more than one shift. Some of them I just take it in. And then I thought, I work with the car departments, so I better take the car guys some. And then it got to where I was delivering a transformer to the Illinois-Indiana border on the CSX. And as I get out of my car, one of the guys turns around and looks at me and he said, I'm not putting this in place until I get the fudge. And I didn't know who he was from Adam. And ended up, he worked at Rose Lake Yard here in St. Louis, and he recognized me. And I said, oh, goodness. And then I had another guy who takes care of the territory from like Terre Haute to St. Louis. That's a train master. He's based in Indianapolis. And I literally UPS'd him a package for him and his kids because he'd said something about it. And now I send it to Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. I send a package up to their train masters and their yard masters and the clerks and all the car department guy. When I do this, I take it in and I'm thinking that it's going to the workers. Right. Well, every once in a while, a guy will, I had a guy retire at the Norfolk Southern here in St. Louis, and I took him his retirement batch. And he said, yeah, my wife said she's going to miss the fudge. And I thought, his wife? And then I thought, oh my gosh, he'd take it home when I bring it in. He just took it home with him. But I thought, well, I guess that's all right. So
is your motto nowadays, have fudge will travel? I mean, do you take a batch when you go out on these runs?
Just about. And I forgot I took some up to Galesburg this last year. I decided to weigh it a couple years ago. Right. And I piled it up literally in my living room before I go, and it's all over everything. I got to 75 pounds and I quit weighing.
Oh my, I was going to say, are you taking like a box truck of this stuff with you?
No, just about. I go get this year. I get boxes. I get containers. One year I hit the jackpot. They had the day after, it'd be November 1st. The local grocery store I go to had leftover jugs, I guess, for candy. And they had lids on them and everything. And they had a bunch of them up there. So I said to one of the gals that manages it, how much if I get 10 of them? And could I get them for $10? And she looked at all of them. She said, if you take every one of these, I'll give them to you for $10. And I think I used those for about 3 years before I finally ran out. I mean, my trunk of my car was full of them. So I was eternally grateful to that lady, believe me.
But awesome.
Yeah, you just put them in whatever you can. But I take care of my guys. So I just do it because I like to say thank you, because they really do help me out. And it doesn't hurt that I can call a yard at 3 a.m. shortly after I've delivered fudge. And you get to talking to somebody, and I don't go to yards at 3 a.m. Believe me, I just tell you that.
No.
And I'll kind of work it into the conversation. Did they leave you any fudge? And they go, oh, you're the one that brought it in. Yep, that was me. And they go, oh, well, let me see if I can move this car for you. It works.
Now, we need you to do, we need you to send that recipe down here to Jim so he can mix up some fudge and take it with him out on the jobs.
What I do, I take them pizza at noontime when there's problems on getting the car switched out. Pizza really, the switch crews love hot pizza.
Sure. Well, who doesn't? Sure, absolutely.
And that's a good way to say thank you.
Now, Martha, I have a question for you, and Jim also with the pizzas. Do your expense accounts include fudge and pizza, or is that at your own expense?
Sometimes that'll be enough.
Tom says that's okay.
Trouble, Bill.
Yeah. But
that's great.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Martha, this has been great.
Oh, it's awesome. Anything else you'd like to wrap up with, Martha?
I think the story about you being with Mr. Haverty is the best story of the whole segment here.
And you know, he in all honesty, he's such a nice man that it was an honor and a pleasure to work with him and his family. It really, truly was.
That's awesome. Well, Martha, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a fascinating look at your life and your continued work as an expediter on the railroads. Kind of, it's just kind of unusual because, like you said, it's pretty much a male-dominant business, just like railroading. But there are a lot of women in railroading these days.
There really are.
Engineers and management and train masters. So
there's two women that are now actually presidents of railroad. That is the CSX and the BNSF.
Martha, thank you again for joining us. It's been a fascinating trip going through your life. And again, thank you for joining us. We really enjoyed it.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Absolutely. This is the train station on tncradio.live. I am with Jim Leaders, my co-host, and Martha Simpson out of St. Louis. We've all known each other for a number of years, and it's been a great ride today. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, we can be reached at HoustonRailFans@gmail.com. Drop us a line, and we'll see you on the next session of the train station.